So I had a choice to make. I could either bow out, feel sorry for myself, live the rest of my life, in that state of mind, or I could choose to participate. I could choose to step back into the arena.
Maya, welcome to Women of Impact.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
As a behavioral and cognitive scientist, I really want to dig deep into what is happening to us right now as the world has changed and the way that we see our lives has changed, because I think we're reassessing what is going to make us happy and what life do we actually want. And so we all may have an idea of what that looks like, but the act to start changing can be so petrifying. And so I want to start with a quote of yours. The reason why we have so much discomfort and anxiety in the face of change is because it threatens our sense of identity. And so I really want to start there. What is happening to our brains and to us that is perceiving change to be so threatening?
Yeah, I mean, that quote has origins in a very personal story of mine, because when I was a teenager, I was on the fast track to trying to become a professional violinist. So from the time that I was 6 years old, the violin really was my life. I committed so much time to it. And when I was 9, I started studying at the Julliard School of Music in New York. And then when I was 13, Itzhak Perlman asked me to be his private violin student. And he's, broadly perceived as the best violinist of our time. And so all of this exciting stuff was happening in my life. I felt like having Perlman take me in as his student gave me that vote of confidence that maybe I had what it would take to become a professional. And then just in a moment, all of my dreams ended because I had a sudden hand injury that prevented me from being able to play the violin again. And I remember in that moment, Lisa, realizing, wow, the violin isn't just a thing that I've been doing that I love. The violin is me. It is such a core part of who I am. It's how I define myself. To this day, I have signs of that. So my right shoulder is slightly elevated relative to my left because of all the hours I spent doing this in a practice room. And when people would ask me, who are you? I felt like I was first and foremost a violinist. Even before I was Maya, I was a violinist. And so when I lost the ability to play at the peak of my career, it led me to ask all of these existential questions about who am I, right? Who am I without this instrument? And that's where this seed of the role that identity plays in how we navigate change came to be. Because I think in that moment, I was grieving the loss of the instrument, but actually in many ways I was grieving the loss of a huge part of myself, and I didn't know what to make of it. So when 2020 hit, and I, like so many other people, were feeling completely overwhelmed by the rapid pace of change that was happening around us, looked to that childhood experience almost for comfort. I've done this change rodeo once before. Maybe there's something I can learn from my former self about how to navigate this new moment, right? The specifics of the changes that we're going through right now might be different, but maybe the psychological strategies that I use to navigate the moment and the different ways that I can see my own sense of self-identity or the community that I live in, that all came into play. And it ultimately led me to start my podcast, A Slight Change of Plans, because I realized, look, if I'm looking to my former self for insight, surely there are people all over the world who are much wiser who can give us tons of insight on how it is that we can navigate these moments of change and try to get out stronger and with some growth on the other side.
That's so powerful. Now I'd really love to just really dig deep into that story, because there's so many moments that, to me, you decided to keep going, you decided to make that change, but so many people don't. And for you to, when you go to the White House and you basically knock on the door and it's like, hey, I want a job here. I mean, it's that type of thing that goes, how do some people get the life that they want and they dream of, and some people stay in where they are for their entire lives and aren't able to take that first step in making the change in the first place? And so you've said, the threat of self and the threat of identity. But so I'd actually love to go deeper on that identity piece and why we feel tight and hold strong to certain identities and how that can be detrimental to us. And there's two people that I've heard you use great examples. Elna, I believe is her name, and Scott. And if you don't mind actually breaking down their two stories and their identities and how people can actually perceive them differently. Because I think if we can really dig deep, there might be these gold nuggets that's like, these are the things that we need to take upon ourselves to then make a change in our life, to have the life we really want.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, I think it's so important for all of us to have a growth mindset around our ability to embrace change. So rather than thinking of yourself as, oh, I'm the kind of person that is stuck and I'm the kind of person that thrives, I think it's actually better to be a little more open-minded about the way in which we can respond to change, and to at least hit our maximum, right? Whatever that maximum is, right? We might all have some aversion to change. We might all like the status quo to varying degrees. I for one, love ritual. I love things being constant. I don't like change. Oftentimes, I think it disorients me, but I have learned how to kind of like push that a bit. But to wrap up my personal story, because I think this extends into the stories around Elna and Scott, there's this concept in cognitive science called identity foreclosure. And it refers to the idea that we can become really fixed in our sense of self, certainly in adolescence, but that can actually persist well into adulthood. And what that means is that it can prevent us from being exploratory, from actually thinking, oh, what are all the other identities that I might be able to occupy, right? Like I've thought of myself as a violinist for so long, but maybe I could be other things. Maybe I could be maybe I could inhabit other identities. And looking back, Lisa, I 1,000,000% fell prey to identity foreclosure as a 15-year-old. Like absolutely 1,000,000%, that would have been the diagnosis. And so what I had to learn kind of painfully over the years, because let me tell you, initially I was just heartbroken and despondent and had no idea what would come next. So it's a very normal part of the grieving process when you lose something that you love and you're not sure you'll find something in the future you love as much as you love that. Is I started to think differently about my identity. Instead of attaching my self-identity to a very specific pursuit, like the violin, a very specific thing, I asked myself, what are the features of the thing that bring me joy, that make me feel passion, right? And what I realized in reflecting back on my life as a violinist is that, sure, I mean, I loved the physical instrument. I loved the way it sounded. I loved being able to produce music. But the thing that I loved the most was being able to emotionally connect with people that I'd never met before, right? So as a kid, you go on stage and there's thousands of strangers in a room, and within moments through your music, you could potentially get them to feel something they've never felt before. And that's an incredibly powerful, moving thing. And what that helped me realize is, oh, you love human connection. That's the thing that gets you to tick. That's the thing that you love. It's connecting with other human beings. And so, yes, I can't find that in the violin, but maybe I can find that elsewhere. And ultimately, I found cognitive science as a field where I actually study the science of human nature and human behavior and what it even means to connect with others, and what kinds of biases drive our emotional states and our decision making, right? It's just been this fascinating exploration to what makes us tick here. And so I hope it's a reassuring message to people who are in the midst of change, who are finding themselves in a state of frenzy because they don't know what comes next, to realize that if you can identify the things that make you happy about the things you do, and more strongly attach yourself to those things, those features, rather than the thing itself, it's going to give you a more stable self-identity as you move through a world that will inevitably change, right? And that was certainly the case for me, and it helped me realize that, on the face of it, it looks like I've done so many different things, right? She was a violinist, and then she was an academic as a cognitive scientist, and then she worked in public policy in the Obama White House. Now she's doing this podcast. But actually there is a through line, which is that every moment I've been trying to either understand the human condition or connect directly with human beings on this planet, to try to either make things better for them, as I did with public policy, or try and share change stories so that we can feel a sense of unity as we go through these changes together.
God, Maya, that's so freaking powerful. And there's something that you said that I was like, oh my God, it hit me like a ton of bricks about you grieving the identity that you had. And I really want to dive deep into that because I had to grieve the thought that I was going to be a mother. And so growing up, I thought I was going to have kids. I thought I was going to be, a very traditional Greek Orthodox wife. And once I decided and found the love of my life, apart from my husband, but business, I started to realize I didn't want children. But there was a part of me that still had that attachment to it. And I realized I had to grieve it. I had to just allow myself the space to say, I thought I was going to be this. I'm no longer this, to my own decision making. But it's still the important process to be able to embrace change.
Yeah, first of all, I love that you shared that. And in many ways, I had a very similar experience that I actually shared on a slight change of plans last year, where my husband, Jimmy, and I lost identical twin girls to a miscarriage with our beloved surrogate, Haley. And it was our second pregnancy loss with our surrogate. And it's so interesting, Lisa, how the motivations, the reasons why we both ended up in this place are very different, but actually we were both grieving the loss of this identity. Because I think when I first saw those positive pregnancy tests, instinctively, in the same way that when you were young and you always thought that you would be a mother, you kind of gave yourself that label. Mm-hmm. I gave myself that label. And then when it was taken away from me, I felt profound grief. And I think that is something that we can underestimate, because we think in that moment, I'm grieving the loss of these babies that could have been, but actually I'm also grieving that I am no longer a mother. And 20 minutes before the miscarriage, I felt like I was. And so I completely, I so appreciate, first of all, your sharing that journey. And I think that's a beautiful thing to also come to the realization of what it is that you want in your life. And sometimes what you want in your life turns out to not be what you thought it would be. There's another principle in cognitive science, which shows us just how terrible we are at cognitive forecasting. We think we can predict 5 years, 10 years into the future about how happy different things will make us. I'm a type A planner, right? So I'm like, this is the 5-year plan, this is the 10-year plan. And the thing that's been more humbling than anything is to realize how my own preferences have changed. So it's not just that the world around me has changed. The things that I thought I desperately wanted, I no longer want, or the things that I never thought I would have wanted, suddenly I do find myself wanting. And so from what I'm hearing, that sounds very similar to the path that you've been on. And one thing that I've learned from making this show that I could not have expected beforehand is, I think if you had asked me, hey, Maya, how would you compartmentalize change in this world? And I would say, there's the willed, expected change, the stuff that you want to see happen. And then there's the unwilled, unexpected change. And I think instinctively I would have said, I would give very different advice to people who are going through those very, very different types of change. And now I no longer have this dividing line in the sand that breaks up these two types of changes, because I actually think, to my earlier point about being bad cognitive forecasters, we surprise ourselves all the time in the face of what we think will be a positive change, but actually turns out to be a lot more complicated with some negative spillover effects. And we surprise ourselves in the face of negative unwanted change, because we maybe feel that we've grown and that there's some silver linings and that it actually was empowering to go through something. And so now my advice is to actually go through change with a profound amount of humility. That's the biggest advice I give to people, which is, don't be too confident about how it is you think you will respond to any given change. There's lots of spillover effects. Change doesn't happen in a vacuum. So you've just taken this new job, you think it's going to be the best job ever and you love it, but you don't realize you're actually going to change as a person, and maybe your relationships will change as a result of having this new job, right? Change doesn't happen in these nice little neat vacuums where it's like, yep, it's just me, Maya, in full. And then I just go through the magic mirror, but I come out with a new job, right? We're these really complex ecosystems. And so the psychological strategies that we recruit in the face of willed change and unwilled change can actually be very similar. And I think we just saw this play out in our respective lives, right? Where we found ourselves grieving the loss of an identity and trying to pick up the pieces and figuring out who we could be without that identity. For me, maybe just for now, hopefully not forever, but maybe it might be forever, in which case I have to kind of come to terms with that. And for you, figuring out, okay, who am I now that this identity that I thought I had for so long growing up is no longer the life that I want to lead? And this tees up Scott's story nicely, which is in many ways, his story is all about self-identity in the face of a big change. So a little backstory on Scott. He was 32 years old when I first talked to him, and he's a software engineer that builds cancer detection tools. And he's also a self-proclaimed health nut. So for the last 10 years or so, he's been doing everything in his power to try to optimize for his future health. And Lisa, I'm talking everything, okay? High intensity interval training, intermittent fasting, veganism, turmeric on food, chia seeds on food. Like if it's in a book somewhere saying that it'll help prevent diminishment or optimize for future well-being, Scott's done it. And then tragically in 2020, he received a stage 4 bone cancer diagnosis that led him to have to pack up his bags, move to MD Anderson in Texas, have his right leg amputated below the knee, a vertebra removed from his spine, surgery on his other leg, and 18 administrations of chemotherapy while he was in Texas. And this was Scott's worst nightmare come true, as you can imagine, because he had literally done everything he possibly could to avoid exactly this outcome. And then here it was happening to him. And he said how much he struggled with his sense of self-identity. I remember it was so stirring. He defined himself for so long as like this fit health guy, right? So he said, what's so fascinating is that on any given day, Maya, I'm more worried about the fact I've lost my 6-pack than I am about the fact that I might die. And I think that shows you how much we attach ourselves to the things that we do in our lives, the things that we care about, right? That it's not like we just stop caring about those things suddenly because we've had this unbelievably horrific thing happen to us, right? We still care. And Scott was saying that through this whole process of, quote, diminishment, where he found, parts of his body being taken out of him, and he, now has a prosthetic leg, and he's just reckoning with a future that is uncertain. He said, I'm starting to realize that maybe my identity is more malleable than I thought. My identity is negotiable now, right? Like maybe like I am still Scott and I still feel like Scott, even though these things have been taken away from me. And it's a process for sure, but I thought it was such a beautiful way to express what we've been talking about throughout this whole conversation, which is this notion of getting so attached to our sense of self-identities that we end up mourning their loss in the face of a big change. And what Scott was doing was actively trying to revisit what was foundational to who he was, right? And actually maybe there are things that he wanted to change about himself now that he was going through this experience. And it was just a nice reminder of identity foreclosure and what a salient role that plays in so many of our lives.
Ladies, I know sometimes you worry that you're not good enough. Trust me, nobody knows that better than me. I spent almost a freaking decade having my soul sucked out of my body, doing something that I didn't love. Finally, even though I was scared to freaking death, I decided I was going to go for it. And I've ended up building the life of my dreams, a life I couldn't have imagined, because I realized that radical confidence is being afraid and doing it anyway. I wrote this book for you with 10 no BS lessons that you need to go from feeling stuck and frustrated to doing anything that you set your mind to. That's so powerful. And, it really is when something happens that forces us to, like in Scott's case, right? It really forced him to. He didn't have a choice. It came to, he had the cancer. And so he had the choice of sticking to his identity of this is who I am and now it's destroyed, or like you said, negotiating and then using that as a catalyst now into a different part of his life. And it's so powerful because so many of us, I think, have, because of what's happened in the world over the last 2 years, we've been forced into a different way of thinking. And so many of us become paralyzed because of it and feel very lost. And I think that that's the part of going from feeling lost to renegotiating who you are and how you saw your life.
this is reminding me of is a guest. Her name is Christine Ha. She's a Vietnamese American, and she grew up eating these amazing, delicious traditional foods that her mom would make for her. And so when she was in college, she actually took up cooking as a hobby because she was eager to reconnect with her Vietnamese heritage, and also reconnect with her mother, who she had lost to cancer when she was a teenager. And so she's cultivating this hobby. She's falling in love with it. It's such a joyful experience. And then in her early 20s, she gets a very rare autoimmune diagnosis that leaves her legally blind by age 24. And in addition to so much else that she needs to figure out about her life, she is mourning the fact that she can no longer cook. And she's feeling, she says, I was feeling sorry for myself. I was feeling alienated from my social community. Like, why are my friends not caring as much as I am about this? Why are they still able to laugh and be happy? And I'm not able to laugh and be happy. And so she's feeling all these things. But the thing she felt more than anything, Lisa, is grieving the loss of her independence. So it turns out that when she lost her mother at a young age, the one thing that she had learned to cultivate was independence, because it taught her that you can't depend on people too much, because sometimes you can lose them in a moment. And so as she was going blind, the idea that she would again have to rely on people, that she would lose her independence, was so devastating to her that she didn't know how to pick up the pieces. And to your point, she just felt paralyzed with fear and angst and anxiety. And then she has this turning point, which is amazing. She said, there's this moment where you wake up and you realize, in the same way that the day after my mom died, people were still driving to work and the sun was still rising, the sun was still setting, the world was still moving on with or without me. So I had a choice to make. I could either bow out, feel sorry for myself, live the rest of my life, in that state of mind, or I could choose to participate. I could choose to step back into the arena. And guess freaking what? She did that and more. Okay. Today, Christine is a world-renowned chef. She goes by the nickname The Blind Cook. She was the winner of the reality TV show Master Chef.
Whoa.
Like, Gordon Ramsay had lots of nice stuff to say about her, and you know that he's a harsh critic.
Yes.
Yeah, she owns 2 restaurants in Houston, Texas. She's written this New York Times bestselling cookbook. She is living an incredible life. And, obviously there was so much hard work and dedication and whatnot, but really it was her reassessing her relationship with independence that was the big change for her. So what she shared with me after all of this is, she makes this decision that she wants to participate in life again, but she still feels with a lot of agita that it requires reliance on other people, right? She doesn't like that. She's a very independent person. And so what she told me is that she's come to redefine what independence means to her. She said, I used to think of independence as not relying on other people. And now I think of independence as living the life you want to live. And it was so beautiful. She said, living the life I want to live means sometimes I do have to ask for help, because I can't be delusional here. I'm not going to be able to drive myself to work. I'm not going to be able to read my mail when it comes in. But there are times where it's okay to ask for help. And then there are other times, she said, where I know I can do the thing on my own and it's going to be frustrating, but I do it anyway. She said, I drive my husband crazy sometimes because I will insist on opening a jar by myself, even though he's like, honey, just let me do that for you. And she's like, no, this is one place I feel like I definitely can be independent and I'm going to do it. So that's an example of taking a part of your identity and reassessing what that part of your identity even should mean in the first place, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to let go of identities. I mean, I'm trying to draw a parallel with my own life now, which is, okay, maybe I'm not actively a mother. That doesn't mean that I can't play a maternal role. What does it mean to be a mother? It means to nourish others, to, maybe help lift up the community that you live in. I can be an amazing aunt to my nieces and nephews. Like she got me thinking about how sometimes the labels or the roles that we want to occupy, or the traits that we want to embody, like independence, we might want to revisit from time to time to make sure that our working model of what that thing ought to mean it really aligns with our values and our long-term goals.
Oh my God, Maya, thank you so much for saying that, because I had to go through the same process when I decided not to have children, because I'm very nurturing. What was interesting though is I had to process it, because I had learned and I'd been taught my whole life that being a mother means you're nurturing and that you care for people. And so I had interpreted that to mean that if I'm not a mother, I'm not that. And I actually had people that said to me, isn't that selfish? So now I started to internalize what other people were telling me, that my decision not to have children is selfish. Also, all the messaging that I got growing up as a Greek Orthodox girl, where it's like, you're going to be a mother, you're going to be, a wife, that's going to be your identity. And now I had to not only say I'm okay with it, but also this doesn't define me in the way that I thought it would define me. I am still nurturing. I do still love people. I am still very caring. And I had to reinforce that in me, because I'd so learned when it comes to identity and labels, like you said, that a mother is this and not being a mother is this. And I had to say that's in my own head, that's BS, and I get to like you said about the her independence, I get to choose what not being a mother looks like to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And so when we find ourselves struggling in the face of a big change because we're losing even a feature of something that we like, because we talked at first, like, try not to attach yourself to the specific thing. Well, what happens when you're like, independence is my thing, right? And then all of a sudden you feel like that's being stripped away from you.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you should think about what that actual feature really means, or like I said, ought to mean, given what your goals are, and what the kind of life that you want to live, to Christine's point.
Yeah. And I love that, in like flipping the perspective, flipping the way that we see things, right? That is all, I believe, a decision that we make. Okay, I see it this way, but I can choose to see it another way, and then figure out how I can then see it. How does that then relate to behavior and habits? Because we all build habits based on the way that we show up every day. And now if we're changing the way we're going to show up or the direction we're going in, how do we unwire habits in order to then recreate new ones to adopt this new life and this change that we want to make?
Yeah, I mean, I will say habit formation is tough, obviously. And it's a very incremental process. So you can't expect to see profound shifts overnight. But I will say, there's this concept very colloquially known in psychology as like the foot in the door perspective, which basically refers to the idea that when you just take that initial step where you're committing to a new set of habits, a new way of being, just the mere fact you've taken that step can signal to your brain that that's something that you value and care about. And so whether it's signing up for a gym membership or filling out a voter registration form, or, signing up for like vegetable meal service, whatever it is, that's on the lighter side, that can actually really impact the future choices that our brain makes, because we like to think of ourselves as good decision makers. So if, 2 days ago, Maya signed up for the gym, I like to believe that she made a good choice and that she knew what she cared about, right? And so I might be more likely to actually stay the course and commit to those things moving forward.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about Elna, because when we decide, okay, this is what I want, this is the dream I'm going to go after, right? And we take that first step, like you said, so now we're reinforcing it, we feel good about it, and we start to work towards our goals, we change the way we see ourselves, we think that we're on the path, this is going to be my happiness, but then we actually realize it changes other parts of us in a negative way. Do you mind walking us through that, and then how we can prevent that?
Yeah, I mean, Elena's story taught me so much. In many ways, she's the reason that I no longer differentiate between, expected and unexpected, willed and unwilled change, because I don't know if I see as much of a distinction anymore in terms of how we should respond. But basically, Elena's dream from the time she was young was to be thin. She thought that if she could just lose weight, it would lead to her dream life. And so in a very, very short amount of time, and in a very unhealthy manner, she lost a ton of weight. I think it was like 100 pounds in 5 months or so. And for a moment there, she did feel like she was living her dream life. And all of a sudden she starts noticing that it's changing her as a person in ways that she doesn't fully like or appreciate. So she's noticing that she's becoming more self-conscious. She's losing some of the boldness that she used to have. She's less outspoken, and is falling prey to more social norms, right, than she used to be. She used to be the, the bold kid that would speak her mind, and suddenly she finds herself kind of cowering a bit more. She thinks she's a worse person, that she's less kind and less empathetic to other people. And so what Elna realized from this was, I thought that I was just going to step through a magic mirror. I was going to be Elna through and through, and I was just going to be the thin version of Elna. And, I use this as a metaphor, the magic mirror, but this actually happened to her. This is what inspired her. She went to like an amusement park with her family when she was younger, and they did have those mirrors, those distortionary mirrors. And so she did see a thin version of her that she aspired to have. And so she did imagine that it would be like a magic trick. Like she would just walk through the mirror and that would be her life. And then what she learned is that change is actually wildly complex, and you not only lack control over how you might respond to all those internal changes that are happening, but you don't control how other people will respond differently to you, and how that will in turn affect what's happening internally. So there's this, it can either be a virtuous cycle or it can be a vicious cycle, but it doesn't always lead us to the end goal. And I think that that whole experience gave her some humility around just how confident we should be that the if only if statement is really the case, right? Oh, I'll be happy only if this happens. Oh, I'm waiting to be happy until this. Chances are that thing is not going to give you that full dose of clean, unadulterated joy and happiness that you thought it would. And similarly, when it comes to Scott's story, I'm so happy to say, by the way, he now, his scans show no evidence of cancer.
Wow, that's amazing.
Completed his full treatment. And so I invited him back on the show to share what life has been like after treatment. But he said he continues to marvel at the fact that his, quote, emotional thermostat has prevailed through all this, that he, even though there's been so much hardship and so much pain, it feels actually quite easy to focus on the good moments that are just as good as they were before, and to have gratitude for all of the wonderful things that he does have in his life. And that's been surprising for him. And he's also felt that he's grown. And he was joking, he's like, Maya, part of me thinks I just need a good kick in the ass, because I feel like I'm a much better person today than I was before all of this. And so in many ways, Scott surprised himself, because he thought this would only be a terrible thing. And actually there were many, many silver linings that he continues to benefit from every day, following his treatment.
Ooh, it's so hard though in those moments to see that silver lining. Like how do you do that? Because the emotion in those moments where you're just crestfallen, like that is a real emotion, that is a real feeling. And in those moments where someone's like, no, see the silver line, like you sometimes just want to be like, oh, how am I going to see the silver? Like it doesn't feel real, right? It doesn't feel right, and it just feels like words. So how do you actually do that?
Yeah, I could not agree more. Look, I experienced exactly this in the fall when, as I mentioned earlier, my husband Jimmy and I lost identical twin girls to a miscarriage with our surrogate Haley, and we were grieving loss on many levels. And so we were so heartbroken. Like those days' events are cemented in my mind. I woke up thinking, we're having a baby. Our surrogate Haley texts us saying she started to bleed. And then she goes to the doctor. Actually, we find out we're having twins, and they're super healthy in there. And all of a sudden, like my emotions are up here, and I'm so thrilled and so excited. And then an hour later, she miscarries the twins. And all at once, the dreams crash. And then we're also told that you probably can't work with this person who you just grown to love. Like she became a member of our family. And so I remember that night I was just so grief stricken, and I was so sad. And I'm lucky to have an incredibly loving, supportive husband, but he pushes me in moments where sometimes it can help a lot, where you're lying in bed and I was having trouble falling asleep, and he said, turns on the lights, he's like, okay, we're doing gratitude lists. And I was like, Jimmy, get out of here. The last thing that I want to be doing right now is a gratitude list, okay? And there I was, like, talking the talk in my day job, being like, gratitude, science, like, we know this stuff works. But in the throes of that moment, Lisa, I did not want to be drafting a gratitude list. And so, but Jimmy pushed me. He said, we can stop at any point, but like, what's the worst thing that can happen, to just remind ourselves of all the other stuff we have in our lives. And so I begrudgingly followed those orders, and together, we're just going back and forth. This is one thing I'm grateful for. That he would go, and then I would go, and he would go. And I will tell you, it didn't make the pain any less in that moment, but what it did give me is perspective. I think what happens in the throes of grief or pain is that we get tunnel vision, and we think that that is the only component of our life that carries value and meaning and importance, right? And what the gratitude exercise did for me is it allowed me to zoom out and see my life through a more holistic, rich, diverse lens. That there were so many components that I had almost been taking for granted or ignoring in the preceding months, as all the logistics of surrogacy were coming underway and we were planning for this pregnancy, and you just get, everything is thrown into that bucket. And so I left that exercise with my husband feeling my life is more than this area, and it's more than this pain in this moment. And what a gift. And I just let a little bit out. And that was, that was a gift that night. And I'm so glad that I did it. So if my experience can inspire people who are like, they're right now in the throes of a breakup, or they've lost someone that they love, or they've lost their job, or, pain knows no bounds, and it takes all forms. So there's countless ways in which we can feel pain. It will feel awful in the beginning to try to remind yourself of things that bring you joy and happiness, because it's so jarring, right? The juxtaposition of like some of these horrible feelings with positivity just like confuses the brain. But if you just get over that initial hump of just maybe answering the question once, giving up one thing, I've certainly seen a lot of positive returns. And it also motivated me as I was thinking about gratitude. One of the things that I was grateful for was that I was currently hosting a show that was all about navigating unexpected and expected changes. And that I had this incredible gift that all of my guests had given me over the preceding year, which was their vulnerability and their willingness to open up to me about what it is that worked or didn't work, and the ways in which they felt healed or broken after a change. And I just felt like I was wiser as a result, and that there was also a therapeutic quality for them that they shared with me in coming on my show and processing their changes out loud. And that is what ultimately inspired me to be a guest on my own show, to turn the mics, and 2 days later to have my producer interview me about my own slight change of plans, because I realized in that moment that I'd asked so much of my guests, but I'd never given the same to my listeners for myself. And that in that moment, I needed the show as much as the show needed me. I needed to process my change out loud. I needed to try to find some silver linings. I needed to make something good out of this experience that otherwise just felt tragic, because all it involved was loss. And having that discussion, it helped me realize what a better person I was for having had Haley and continuing to have Haley in my life as just a person who has enriched me and has made me feel enlightened about the kind of humanity that we can show to others when they're in need. She really taught me that, and I'm forever grateful for that. And there were many other wonderful things that emerged, including when I put out the episode. I hear from guests all over the world every single day since I put out that episode, sharing their losses with me, opening their hearts up to me, pouring out kindness and compassion and warmth and sending it my way. And then I get to do the same in reverse. So like, talk about a damn silver lining. Like that is something I could never have expected. And it was inspired in part by my gratitude exercise that one night, where I realized, hey, this thing really means a lot to me, and now I'm going to lean into it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That is so beautiful and powerful, and there's so much in there. So first of all, I'd like to ask, how do you in those moments, I've heard you say you don't believe in everything happens for a reason. And
true story. I'm sorry.
I wish I did. I do not want you to apologize, girl, because here's the thing. I'm such an advocate for what works for somebody right, is very true and real. So I want to pick people's brains and find out what works for people and then be able to adopt it for myself. And I used to have a problem with that phrase myself, in that everything happens for a reason, because some things to some people, the loss of a child, I don't know how you say that there's a reason behind that, but you can flip your perspective. And everything you just laid out was so powerful. Would you mind actually talking to me a little about that, and how some people use it, I think, as empowerment? And what is it that you don't think is empowering? And then how do you use your own mindset to empower yourself to literally get on a podcast, like you said, turn the mic on yourself and just vocalize your vulnerability in real time?
Yeah, I love that question, Lisa, so much. I don't think things happen for a reason. And I think the primary reason for that is I can't justify the suffering that I see in this world that befalls amazing human beings. And so if things were to happen for a reason, it's like, from whose vantage point? I mean, if you live an incredibly happy, joyful life that is free of pain, then it might be easy to say things happen for a reason. But then you read a story about just untold suffering, the Sandy Hook massacre, and you think to yourself, how could anybody in this moment say that things happen for a reason? Like, how could we ever justify the pain to these children and their parents and the community of Sandy Hook? I can't. And so I wish I could believe things happen for a reason, because I actually think it's like a happier way to live your life. I just feel like if I were to buy into that, I would be buying into a delusion of some kind. And so with that said, I don't believe things happen for a reason. And yet I believe as humans, we are natural born storytellers, which means we try to build narratives and find meaning out of the trials and tribulations in our lives. And I find myself doing this all the time. Like, I don't have spiritual or religious beliefs. As I mentioned, I don't think things happen for a reason. And yet when I have something terrible happen in my life, I effortlessly try and figure out how to make meaning from it, how to make sense of the tragedy, how to try to find silver linings in what's happened to me, how to, if it's just terrible, how to turn it into something good. I have all of these human instincts. And so what this experience has taught me is that no matter what your religious or spiritual beliefs are, I think we all do this as humans. We want to make sense of our lives. We want to feel like it is not just chaos that we're living in. In some ways, it's probably our subconscious way of exerting control over our lives, is to do this meaning making all the time, right? It's this game we play with ourselves to try to make it seem like we aren't just operating in a cloud of randomness all the time, which may be actually what we're operating in. And so even though I don't believe that the storytelling, is cosmic in its significance, that it's like destined by the universe or anything like that, I do find a lot of value in trying to figure out ways that I can find meaning and purpose in suffering.
And I think that is so beautiful, especially you putting it towards the we write our own story, because to that point, I think we can make meaning out of this is because of me, right? And we can make it negative. This is because my internal dialogue. This is because you're no good, Lisa. This is because you're stupid. This is because you have no, right? So I can make meaning out of that and it be detrimental to me, or I could make meaning out of it that inspires me, that motivates me to do something.
Can I share another example? I mean, the guests on A Slight Change of Plans, they're all so amazing. I am so in awe of humanity every time I come out of an interview with one of these people that I get to the privilege of interviewing. But one of them was, her name's Yuna Lee. She's a Korean American journalist, and she was trying to capture the plight of North Korean defectors who try to flee North Korea in search of freedom, so cross over the border into China. And while she was there filming footage, she was captured by North Korean soldiers and was held captive for 140 days on North Korean soil and had been told that she was destined to go to a hard labor camp. So she is, I don't know if there's an adjective to describe the psychological state when you're being held captive in North Korea, right? And you think this might be the entirety of your life. She has a 4-year-old daughter at home and a husband who she's missing desperately, and she's losing hope at many points along the way, as you can imagine would be the case. But there was one aspect to her experience that, to use your language, inspired her, and that was completely unexpected. And that was the kindness and humanity that the guards who were put on her case showed her during her time there. She said that they would engage in these small acts of kindness when no one was looking, because they didn't want to get in trouble, but to show her that they cared. They would greet her with cherries, and when her favorite songs would be playing on the radio, they would turn up the volume. One of the female guards on her last day at the complex went to Yuna's room and said, "I really hope you get to reunite with your family. I really hope that one day you get to see your daughter and your husband again." And then there was this other guard who would continue to try to give her hope, to tell her that it was worth fighting for, because she was going to see freedom again. She'd grown up in South Korea, so she'd been taught to see the North as the enemy. Mm-hmm. And she said that this experience gave her a much more compassionate view of an entire population that she had been taught to hate. And so now that she's returned, she was actually rescued by former President Bill Clinton, and brought back to the United States. But she said that now that she's back home and she turns on the news and she sees coverage of North Korea, those images of people who were deeply kind to her, that's also part of North Korea in her mind now. And it's allowed her to not see the world in such black and white terms, but to see people in whole communities with a lot more nuance. And she feels that it's made her a better person as a result. Change is the topic that's on everyone's minds right now, and it fills us with such a complex array of emotions. On the one hand, we feel potentially inspired and excited and like we can start anew, and then on the other hand, we're feeling terrified and anxious and despondent and scared and fearful and all those things. And so we don't always know how to engage with our own change experiences. And so my goal in making this show was to give people a ticket onto the trains of other people's change journeys, like all aboard, and then you can go along with them, glean whatever insights you can from their experiences that could potentially help you build your own change survival kit, right? Because we're all just trying to survive and get by. And so the more tools we can put into that kit, I think the better off we'll be.
Oh my God, I freaking love that. So where can people buy a ticket to jump on board your train of change?
So I'm on Instagram, so you can follow me at Dr. Maya Shankar, so MayaShankar. And I also have a very light Twitter presence, Slight Change Pod. And then, of course, my show, A Slight Change of Plans, is available anywhere you get podcasts. And it is truly, my passion, love project. So I hope people love it as much as I've loved making it.
Oh my God, thank you. Guys, you've seriously got to go check out her podcast. It is fire. And honestly, this woman is so freaking amazing. What she delivers on a daily basis about the mind and how you show up and living the life you really want isn't going to be freaking easy. But she's a blueprint and a guide, like she said, on how to actually get there. So go check her out. And guys, if you're not following me, follow me at Lisa Bilyeu. And if you're not subscribed, click that subscribe button down there. And until next time, be the hero of your own life. Peace out, guys.
There's a lot of messages out there. Let's be happy. Let me show you how to just be happy all the time. And I say that is just not realistic. I say we are human. We have this whole array of emotions for a reason.